You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Angebretson, episode number 217. Hey there, welcome back to the podcast. I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. Thank you for joining me. Today, we are doing a deep dive into the concept of setting up an ADHD-friendly organizational system. Now, I am using the term organizational system broadly here today because my goal is that the strategies and the tips that I share here in this episode can help you get more organized in really any area that's front and center for you. So it's really kind of a framework that I'm sharing with you that you can take and apply to any area of your life, whether you're trying to tame the chaos near your front door that tends to happen when everybody comes home at the same time, or you want to get a better handle on client deadlines for your business or anything in between. I'm hoping that you can find key takeaways in this episode to help you get organized. You ready? Okay, let's dive in. Now, the truth is, when trying to get organized, it is incredibly tempting to go down the rabbit hole of Pinterest or Google in search of the perfect organizational system. Again, this is the tendency for me. My brain's like, oh, let's go find the best system. Let's do a bunch of research and find what everybody else has done. Now, doing this kind of research can be helpful at times, right? It can be useful to see what other people have done. But I've also found that doing this kind of deep dive can absolutely work against us, especially when we don't know specifically what we need before we begin the search. Let me know if you've ever been in a situation like this, okay? So you find what appears to be the organizational system, right? You've gone down the rabbit hole, you've done all the research, you have found the one. It is the system with all the fancy bells and whistles. And after reading about how wonderfully this system worked for whoever else designed it or whatever blog post you're reading, you convince yourself, hold on, this is clearly what I need to solve all problems in my life. This is the solution. So you go all in and you do all the things and probably overwhelm yourself in trying to get everything set up perfectly and all the steps laid out in a really clear way. And I, at least, tend to completely overcomplicate the process overall. And then finally, when we're exhausted and frustrated, we step back and we look more closely at this quote unquote perfect organizational system and we realize, wait, hold on. I just put all this effort into creating this system that isn't actually a good fit for me because it's not really solving the specific problem I had. This system that I just designed was actually created for someone else and their organizational challenges. So then, feeling discouraged, we try and muster the energy to start again from scratch. Now, my guess is you've probably been in a situation like this before. And if you haven't, let me tell you, it's not fun. Okay, so to avoid this kind of situation as you are creating and finding your organizational systems that work for you, what we want to do is hit pause and do some reflection before we start researching and planning our organizational system. Okay, and during this pause, we want to check in with ourselves and ask 3 important questions. All right. So the first question that we want to look at is, what problem are you trying to solve with this system? What exactly do you want to organize? What is the specific problem you're trying to solve? Do you want to keep shoes on the shoe rack so you don't have to waste time looking for all the matching pairs? Do you want to find a way to deal with all the paperwork that's coming in now that school's back in session? Do you want to develop a better way of tracking incoming bills so that you avoid late charges or something? Do you want to streamline your professional collaboration process so that you don't waste a bunch of time writing a lot of emails and forgetting who you wrote to? What is the specific problem that you want to solve with an organizational system? Now, with all of these random examples I just gave, you'll notice that while they're all incredibly different, there is one commonality. And that is that they are all laser focused, right? We got very specific and laser focused on the problem. I didn't say, I just want to organize my life. Instead, I picked a specific problem that would make a difference if I solve for it. Because as we know, as ADHD brains, it's quite easy to fall into all or nothing thinking. So we might tell ourselves, well, I have to get everything organized now, or it's not worth it. What's the point? We have to get it perfect. We have to have the ideal organizational system for everything. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. Who cares if it's just the shoes organized? I have to get the whole house organized. But we just want to gently remind our brains that this process of all or nothing is not necessarily helpful when we're trying to get organized. I remind myself of this all the time. That's why I'm laughing. And so I encourage all of us, myself included, to start seeing these shades of gray a little bit more when we're thinking about organization. Because when we can zoom in on one thing or one area and get so much more specific, we are much more likely to successfully implement these new organizational systems and actually use them so that we can see those results that we want in the area. And then once it's working well, we can absolutely pick something else and repeat the process and expand on it. But we want to start small. I promise you, these small wins do add up. Okay, so that's question one that we want to ask ourselves. What is the specific problem I'm trying to solve? Now, question two is, what would a good solution look like? So once you have the problem identified, now we want to think about potential solutions. So in your mind, what would a good solution look like? What would this area look like if it were already organized? If you had a system in place, what would be ideal? And I really encourage you to let your imagination run this part of the session, okay? Jot down any solutions that come to mind. Don't discount any of them. This is brainstorming mode. So let your brain shine. Go through all the ideas. Maybe you're looking for a way to deal with paperwork overload, right? Excess papers everywhere. So you start brainstorming different solutions and you go, okay, well, maybe I could install cubbies so everybody can put their papers in the different designated areas when they come home from school. Or maybe I set up color-coded filing systems for papers and manuals. Or maybe I put a portable scanner where the paperwork tends to pile up so we can just scan stuff and go completely digital. Or maybe I have a weekly paper sifting session. Getting alliteration here and tongue-tied. But the family gets together and we review the papers for the week or whatever. So we're really taking time to brainstorm whatever we can think of to solve for the specific problem we identified, right? I just offered a couple of ways that we might deal with paperwork, but again, for you, you're going to have even more ideas for your specific situation because you know your family and your lifestyle best. You're going to have even better ideas for what will work best for you. But the key is brainstorming possible solutions so that you can think about each one a little bit before diving all the way in. We want to think about some different solutions so that we can see how they might work, think them through before going all in and spending all the time setting up that system, not sure if it's actually the one that will work for us. Okay, so that brings us to question 3, which is, what generally works well for you when you think about getting organized? Now, as I have said before many times on this podcast, no two ADHD brains are alike, right? What works for one person with an ADHD brain might not work for another. This is not a problem. With that being said, to help you pinpoint solutions that will work for you, it's really helpful to consider what generally has worked for you in the past. You know your brain best, so you might consider your learning style, right? What works best for you in terms of your learning style or your lifestyle or your general preferences? So let me give you an example of what I mean here. I'm going to walk through these 3 different categories I mentioned. So first of all, I said your learning style. So if you think about that, you can ask yourself, okay, how do I learn best? What's the best way for me to kind of take in and process information. What's really useful? Now, are you an auditory learner? Do you prefer to listen to things like podcasts and audio tutorials? And do you learn best by listening? And do auditory reminders and timers and sounds help you? Do you prefer auditory? Or maybe you're more of a visual learner and you really like reading and seeing the directions kind of step by step, or you do well with pictures and before and after images to help you see, oh, this is how it was, this is how I want it to be, and it's helping your brain see it in that way. Or visual cues or color-coded things to help your brain remember. Maybe you're more of a kinesthetic learner and you like to physically interact with objects or have tangible things in front of you. I've talked about my timular before, which is like this dice for those of you who are listening to the podcast and not looking at the video on YouTube. I have this visual cube that I'm showing. I love to have this because kinesthetically, I can pick it up and turn it over and easily track my time. Plus, it's a visual thing because I literally see it. It's a reminder to turn it over when I'm tracking my time and changing to a new activity or a new task that I'm working on. So maybe you're more kinesthetic and you want to be able to move objects around to help you stay organized. So as you think about your organizational style and approach, keep your learning style in mind because that way you're more likely to connect with the final product. It's going to be most useful for you. I also mentioned your lifestyle, right? You want your organizational system to work for you in real life. For example, if you travel a lot for work, you might want to use some sort of a portable solution for all your paperwork that you can kind of take with you anywhere. Because if you just have something that stays on your desk, I mean, sure, that can be helpful when you're in your office, but it's not going to solve your problem when you're on the road, right? So you want to solve for your lifestyle. You might also want to consider your family if you live with your family, because again, if you're trying to create an organizational system, you want one that will be supportive for everyone as much as possible. Maybe you have several kids at home and you're trying to keep everybody's shoes organized and you realize, okay, not everybody loves it when I throw everything into one big basket because several of my kids have similar sized feet. And so their shoes kind of get confusing because they don't know whose it's whose. And what might actually be easier is if we had separate cubbies for each person so their shoes can go in there and they know where to put them, right? So you find a system that works for you and your lifestyle and your family. And then it's important to also consider your everyday reality. Think about that busy Tuesday evening when you finally get home, you walk in the door, you frankly have nothing left in the tank. Your executive functions already did not show up to work. And now by the end of the day, your brain just feels like mush. Okay. You want to set up your systems for days like that. You want to set up your systems with a level of ease that is built for that kind of day, not your best day. And then finally, you want to think about your general preferences. Are you more of a pen and paper kind of person, or do you prefer digital tools? If you prefer pen and paper, then a digital solution, no matter how shiny and new and exciting, probably won't be a long-term solution. So don't try to force yourself to use systems that just don't feel supportive for you. Honestly, if you try to implement a system that just doesn't jive with your preference and the way that your brain works, you're going to just be fighting yourself every time to use it. It's going to be hard to stick with it if it doesn't feel like a good fit. Because again, the best system is the one that you use, and the one that you use is the one that actually works for your brain. Okay, so think about what you've successfully used in the past. What has worked for you in the past when it comes to organization? And you can also consider what didn't work and what you didn't like about it, because you can learn from both of those to inform your organizational system that you're developing as you move forward. So by answering these 3 questions, we now have this solid framework in mind that's going to save us so much time as we research and develop our organizational approach, because you already know what you're looking for. And in fact, if you are doing a search, you can even use what you're looking for as clear keywords to help you find the exact solutions you want. When you have super specific criteria and you go to Google or Pinterest with that, it's going to make your search for a solution so much easier. I mean, just think about the difference between what you'd find if you searched for how to organize kids' stuff versus a simple way to organize kids' shoes, or organize paperwork versus how to go digital with paperwork so I can collaborate with others at work, right? You're going to get a much more specific solution for your specific problem. It really helps you cut through the clutter and find exactly what you need to get organized. So again, as you set up your organizational system, the most important thing you can do before you get started actually implementing things is to reflect on and answer these 3 questions. Number 1, what is the specific problem I'm trying to solve? Number 2, what might a good solution look like? Let's brainstorm. And then number 3, what has worked for me in the past and what specifically made it successful? And how can I use that to inform the approach I'm creating next? And then from there, you can either search for a solution with a much more narrowed search, or you can start designing your own solution using the criteria you uncovered. All right. Now, not all organizational systems are an awesome fit for those of us with ADHD brains because many of them are quite demanding on our executive functions. It requires a lot of tiny little steps and all these little details, and it's just not great for a lot of ADHD brains. So with that in mind, I want to share just a few other tips as you are finding and designing and implementing an organizational system that works for you. These are just suggestions to keep in mind. You don't have to follow them to the T. They're just general guidelines that I think can be useful when you are designing your organizational system. Okay. So number 1 is to keep it simple. Those of us with ADHD tend to feel overwhelmed and find ourselves overstimulated more easily than a neurotypical brain. And we have a lot more stimulation going on in our brain, and we can slip into that overwhelm much faster. And we can also find ourselves stuck in the details a lot more and have a hard time distinguishing between things that actually matter and the things that really don't. So if we try to make our organizational systems way too complex, we're probably going to end up feeling frustrated or defeated or overwhelmed, thinking, it's just not working. I can never stick with it. It's just too much. And then when we start telling ourselves those stories, we're going to probably just stop using the system altogether and revert to whatever we were doing before. So it's especially important for us to do our best to keep these organizational systems as simple as possible. Okay, it's better to have a few simple systems that you use regularly than one big, fancy, complicated system that you maybe used once and then never again. So when you're either designing or researching solutions, take time to ask, could I make this easier? Can I simplify this at all? Can I streamline it? Now, maybe you can't. Maybe the solution you found or the solution you designed already is really simple. In that case, great, amazing. Move forward to tip 2. But if you're looking at something that seems a little bit complicated, or when you're trying to explain it to someone, you find yourself going, this is sounding a little more complex than when I first imagined it. See if you can brainstorm a couple of ways to cut out a few steps or to simplify it a bit. It might mean that you start small. Maybe you pick one part of the new system and implement that right away. And then once you have that up and running, you can start implementing a little more, one piece at a time. Or maybe you're imagining the fancy bedazzled schedule on the wall that's going to keep everybody in the family in the loop, and it has all the color coding and it has, the stickers and everything there, and it's just gorgeous. Now, I love a beautiful schedule. We can all appreciate that. However, your schedule doesn't have to be fancy to be effective. Okay? So ask yourself, how can I make this easier? How can I simplify? There is nothing wrong with a simple printed schedule that doesn't sparkle or shine. You don't have to do that. Now, if you want to, and that makes it fun for you so that you actually use it, go all in. But simplify as much as possible so that you're not creating a lot of requirements of I have to do all these things in order to follow the system. No, keep it as simple as possible so that you actually use it. So this brings us to tip number 2, which is using visual cues. So if you are a visual learner or you struggle with short-term working memory like I do, visual cues can really be a useful support in helping you implement and remember to implement your system. And it's kind of like leaving your brain a trail of breadcrumbs to follow. When you see the cue, you remember, oh yeah, that's right, I wanted to do that. So for example, if you're developing a filing system for all the incoming paper during the school year, maybe you hang some sort of inbox folder on the wall or something in a spot where you see it every day and where your kids see it every day when they walk in the door. And then when you or anybody comes in, they remember, oh yeah, I need to put all my papers from school into my file slot. If you're using a digital calendar, maybe you try color coding different types of tasks. So you're putting work tasks on your calendar in green and your personal tasks in blue and your fun things in orange or whatever. By color coding, you're helping your brain visually see at a glance what type of activity is coming up next. And you can keep yourself from kind of overscheduling yourself with the same type of task as well. You might notice, there's a whole lot of work here. Do I need to balance it out? Do I need a little more fun? In addition to color coding, there's a lot of other visual cues too, right? You might use pictures or emojis. You might use written directions just written out. You might have a simple checklist or a physical object. I talked about my timular or the inbox that you might have on your wall for all the incoming paper. You might have workflows written out and laminated on your desk so you can kind of check them off as you move through the common workflows that you do. So there's so many different visual cues, sticky notes, anything like that to help your brain remember to stick with that organizational system, because these things can help us really stay on track and remember what needs to be done. Tip number 3, when it comes to really finding organizational systems that work for you, is to automate as much as possible. Right? Automating tasks can be such a lifesaver, frankly, for everybody, but especially for those of us with ADHD and ADHD tendencies. Because when we automate, we're really minimizing the need for our short-term memory recall. Yes, please, right? We free up a lot of energy and time to focus on other things. So what might we automate? Well, a common one is paying bills. You might use automatic bill pay through online banking or whatever your cable company or whatever, so we can get those bills paid on time. It might be email management. Platforms like Google or Outlook, they have rules where you can implement systems to sort your emails into different folders or tabs automatically. So that way, when you open up your email, you're not flooded with all the information. Instead, maybe you've filtered your newsletters into a different folder so that all you see are the things that actually need a response, something like that. So tip number 4 is to allow for flexibility. Okay. So we often have pretty big dreams and expectations whenever we implement a new system. But let's be honest, sometimes things don't work out as planned. After we try the system for a couple of weeks, we may find, oh, I definitely need to make some changes here. I didn't realize XYZ. I want to make some shifts. That's okay. Okay. If we need to make changes, remember, that doesn't mean something's gone wrong or that we're bad at systems or that we can't do it, right? Tweaking is part of making the system work for you. That's that process of iteration that we talk about on the podcast so often. So go ahead and make those adjustments as needed. There's no need for guilt or shame to come along for the ride here. This is part of the process. And then additionally, remember that what works for you today may not work for you in the future as well. So you may first establish an organizational routine and you realize you need to make some adjustments because there were a couple of things that didn't work or whatever. But then in addition, you may find that you establish a routine, it's working for you, and then something changes in your life and we need to make an adjustment. That's okay. We are all constantly evolving and navigating different seasons of life. You might start a new relationship or begin a different job, or you now have to drive your kids to a bunch of after school activities, or you start taking a ceramics class at night. And we all have these different seasons of life. So there's so much benefit in practicing flexibility with your organizational systems, because that's going to help you make slight adjustments. You can see what's working, what's not, and then make adjustments so that you can build that system or adjust that system to support your new season. All right. And then finally, tip number 5, which is to be patient with yourself. So developing and maintaining organizational systems is not an overnight process. Surprise! Getting organized does take some time. So please give yourself grace and space to make mistakes when they happen. Not if they happen, when they happen. Okay? Each time something doesn't go quite as planned, there's an opportunity there to learn from it. And remember, a perfect system does not exist. So don't get trapped by that lure of finding the very perfect system. Instead, allow yourself to be patient and make small adjustments as needed, remembering that it is a marathon, not a sprint. But once you get them locked in, it makes such a big difference. And you really can baby step your way to better organization in a way that works for you. All right. Let's wrap this up with the key takeaways here, okay? So if you start looking for a new organizational system or you want to design a new organizational system, I invite you to remember these takeaways. Number 1, check in with yourself before you start designing that system or searching for a system or researching about it. And ask yourself 3 questions. Number 1, what problem do I need to solve? What is the specific problem here? Number 2, what does my ideal solution look like? What would I love to see? Number 3, what has worked for me in the past? What can I learn from that? Try not to get caught up in all the different shiny options, okay? Instead, focus on the simple, practical, doable solutions. And then you can adjust and bring in the fun and bring in the sparkle if that's supportive for you. But we just want to make sure that the actual system we're creating is one that's supportive of the problem you're trying to solve. Also, use visual cues to help you remember to use that system once you've established it and put it in place. And then finally, be flexible and patient with yourself. Remember, you're a human, not a robot. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you're ready to take these concepts deeper and apply them to your life, if you're ready to learn how to support your ADHD in a way that works for you, then I invite you to check out today's show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/group to learn more about my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome. If it sounds like a great fit, you can add your name to the waitlist and you'll be the first to know when the next cohort begins. Also, have you grabbed the podcast roadmap yet? It has the most popular episodes all detailed for you, so you can get yourself up to speed and ready to work with your ADHD brain. You can grab it now through the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/map. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.